Okay, so here we go. Call to action. Again, we have Marcella Piper Terry, we have Sheila Lewis Ealey, we have Melissa, I can't say her last name, Sfura, and we got Jeff Schott, who is an attorney. And if you guys could just briefly introduce yourself now that we got everybody on, that would be very helpful. Marcella.
Oh, me again? Okay. All right. Well, I'm Marcella Piper Terry. I'm founder of vaxtruth.org, and I have a daughter who was injured by vaccines as a child. She's now a young adult. I'm a biomedical consultant, and I am an activist, and that's about it. Grandma.
All right, Jeff.
Again?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a volunteer with the Pennsylvania Medical Freedom Alliance. I practiced law in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for about 16 years, mostly on disability and employment law. I'm a cancer survivor and have an autistic granddaughter as well. So we've worked on a lot of other issues and with other people now in the Pennsylvania Medical Freedom Alliance to help pass laws authorizing, for instance, medical marijuana for autism patients and for better insurance coverage for oral chemotherapy treatments.
And Sheila, I think everybody knows you, Sheila, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself for those that haven't met you yet?
Hi, I'm Sheila Lewis Ealey. I'm the mother of 4. My son, Timothy, who's 17, is vaccine injured. And I'm going to be a grandmother in December.
Congratulations.
For me. I'm excited.
And Sheila was, her son's story was featured in Vax, the movie, From Cover Up to Catastrophe. So let me just mention that we decided to put this call to action together because of something that came to light recently. And I'm going to let Jeff take over because he's the attorney and he's dissected this document. Jeff, could you just share with us just a brief understanding of what the CDC and HHS is trying to do and what your interpretation of that is?
Okay. First, I think everybody has to understand that this is based on the Public Health Service Act, which authorizes the Department of Health and Human Services to take measures to detain and examine people traveling either between states or into the country, basically to guard against communicable diseases. Now, the Health and Human Services Department has in turn delegated to the CDC the responsibility for implementing that. And the CDC has recently issued, proposed August 15th, I believe, has issued new proposed rules explaining how it now intends to enforce that if need be. Do you want me to go into all the interpretation or?
Yeah, well, yeah, please go into the interpretation and then.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Melissa.
Yay! Thank you, Melissa.
All right.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I'm so glad. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So Jeff, please tell us a little bit about what your interpretation of that from a legal standpoint.
Okay. First of all, it applies to, for the most part, to what are described as quarantinable diseases. Now, there's a list of quarantinable diseases, but frankly, they're really easy to change by executive order. They were created by executive order. So dwelling on what they are probably doesn't matter, because if there's an outbreak of, say, measles, it wouldn't take much to add measles to the list. So it also expands some definitions. It expands the definition of what the pre-communicable stage, which is the first part that authorizes your exam and detention, is. And really notably, it includes exposure to a quote-unquote contaminated environment, which can really cast a wide net, especially, say, a polluted, an infected water supply. That would be in pretty much the entire population. It also expanded the definition of interstate travel, which gives it the CDC its authority, as people likely to come in contact with others who may travel interstate, which here in Pennsylvania, between all our border states, that's pretty much everyone we know. Because on a daily basis, I'm pretty sure everybody here deals with somebody who is likely to travel out of state. So those are the main expansions that cause me the most concern. There's been some worry around the internet about forced vaccinations, which I don't see as really being forced vaccinations, although there can be a lot of arm twisting. There's a lot of discussion in the description of the new rules about offering vaccines, and a lot of discussion about the cost of vaccines. One thing I find really funny about the whole description leading into the actual rule itself is that the two major excuses for these new rules are Ebola, which is on the quarantinable disease list, and measles, which is not as of now. And yet, like, half of that intro discussion is about the measles, and a lot of the cost factors that they have to weigh costs and benefits when they propose new rules. And a lot of the cost benefit analysis is actually giving out MMR vaccines, which is distasteful to me on a totally different basis, that for a measles outbreak, you got to give the triple vaccine because that's all they're going to get.
So may I interject here? I'm listening to you, Jeff, and let me tell you what just happened in Louisiana. Now, Louisiana floods have been flooding since 78 that I can remember, 65, when I was a little girl. And this is the first time that public health went out with an arsenal of DCAP vaccinations to vaccinate everyone who was in the shelters. A little arm twisting, so-called not a mandate to prevent tetanus. Now, no one has stepped in cow's manure. It was just water. And this is the first time in a flood that I've known for them to do that. Then we get, just in a suburb outside of New Orleans, a little further outside in La Place, and then the one that comes more into the city, and then now into the city, we've had water advisories to boil the water. So there's something going on. And I'm wondering if it ties in to this edict that's about to come down with the CDC.
Well, and this is Melissa. I mean, you can call it arm twisting if you want to, but for me, myself, and I speak for myself, it's coercion. If you're looking at either being, quarantined, isolation, separated from your family, apprehended, all of these things, or get a vaccine, that's force.
Yeah.
I think, and it's past time for people to get upset about this, and it's time now to act upon this. They can, and like John Rappaport said in his article about it, is that he said it's tortured linguistic gibberish from the CDC, and guarantees that any American can be assessed with a disease justifying arrest. And he says that it's lunatic bureaucratic doublespeak and the loopholes through which the government can drive a truck.
Yeah.
So, and then even under the agreement, it says The individual will observe public health measures authorized under this part as the CDC considers reasonably necessary to protect the public's health, including quarantine, isolation, conditional release, medical examination, hospitalization, vaccination, and treatment. I wouldn't agree to that. So what would happen to me? That's not an agreement I'm willing to make. So what would happen to me?
And that's exactly where the arm twisting comes in, because often signing those agreements is your ticket from being detained to getting conditionally released. And who isn't going to take that ticket except maybe us?
Right, exactly. So it's a no for this family, and I encourage anyone listening, it needs to be a no for you as well. And we need to immediately be writing our state and federal representatives. Our state representatives really can't do anything about it, but they need to know what's going on too. Because when we go to them during, when state legislation is going on, they need to be aware. We need to be in constant communication with them anyway. So I'm encouraging everyone to include their state representatives along with their federal representatives on top of leaving your public comment with the CDC. And then on top of that, they do have an oversight committee. I'm pretty sure the CDC is like a lot of agencies that like to maybe fly under the radar of their oversight. So I think that the Energy and Commerce Committee also needs to be written by the people, and they need to know that we vehemently oppose this as well.
I was going to ask Marcella to pipe in. What do you think about all this? What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts, I'm glad to hear Jeff's take on it, because I was a little bit, I saw a blurb earlier that said, this it's not as bad as what it seems or what people are making it out to be. I don't get that from what he just said. I think
the reason I just said that was because they already claim they have all these powers. Well, basically, they're just slightly expanding what they already claim to have. So I'm not saying it's not bad. I'm just saying it's already bad.
Right. I agree with that.
Well, and what they're proposing is against federal and state constitutions, and we definitely, Melissa's right. We need to be contacting all of our Congress people. And our legislators, our elected officials on the state and federal level, and voicing our dissent and our disagreement with this. Something, I haven't read John Rappaport's article. I will definitely do that. One of the things that, people keep saying is measles is not a quarantinable, it's not on the quarantinable disease list, but I actually wrote about a case in California last year during the quote-unquote Disneyland measles outbreak, where a woman, she was a graduate student, her first name was Ilsa, or Isla, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but her sister had measles, and they were trying to quarantine her. She wasn't sick, she had been around her sister, so they've been trying to enforce this quarantine. So I think Forrest Morady did a piece on it today, and he was talking about how they're trying to expand the quarantine. But I've heard that a couple of times. It's not about measles. If it's not about measles, why is measles in the document? The word measles in the document 198 times.
Right.
It's all about measles. And talking about Jeff talking about in Pennsylvania and the environment up there. I live in a tri-state area where I live. I'm just a few miles from Illinois and a few miles from Kentucky, and I live in Indiana. And it's the same kind of a situation. I live in a small town, and a lot of the people here work in other states. So the scenario, and that's a really common kind of scenario for people where I live and all over the United States. So, I was thinking, this is like the way the thing reads, it's not just that somebody that you come in contact with, or the entire, when you're thinking about measles, if there's one case of measles at the local high school, they're going to be going, according to this document, what they could do is they could go to the homes of every single student in that high school, not just the ones who are vaccinated, but every single student in that high school, and ask all of the family members for their vaccine records, their vaccination records. Because when they talk about pre-contagious, I think is what the word they use. I have to read it again. I was trying to get through the whole thing on Friday, but I definitely have to read it again, and I'm really short on time right now. But, or pre-communicable. Pre-communicable means you may possibly have been exposed. And if you are pre-communicable and you may possibly have been exposed, when you're talking about one single case of measles in a small town, that's everybody in that town. Because, you know, we've got the high school, we've got churches, we have a McDonald's and a Dairy Queen and a Subway, and we've got the after-school program and the rec center, you know, and the library. So you're talking about one student in that high school, and there's not a whole lot of places for high school people to go, right? So measles, the latency period for measles from exposure to symptoms is 10 to 21 days. So when somebody's out in the environment, in a small town environment for 21 days before they have symptoms, they could come in contact easily. The contacts from one person to the next, and the ripple effect of that, you know, if you're looking at this as somebody who wants to incite panic against people who are not vaccinated, which is what this is about, because people are not, you know, like, people are waking up. 73%, according to one video I saw just yesterday or the day before, pediatricians were saying that 73% of their patients are now questioning whether vaccines are actually necessary. And in order to make something necessary, you have to, in order to make the vaccines necessary, they have to instill fear. So people who understand that measles is not a big deal, especially in developed countries, and who know that it's not only not a big deal, but it's also beneficial to get wild measles and to get over it and to enjoy the lifelong immunity and the benefits of not only specific immunity, but non-specific immunity, and how that relates to cancer protection. Yeah. Measles is something we all should be celebrating like they used to before there was a vaccine. But more people are waking up. So what they have to do now is to instill this fear, and it's like there's fear of contagion, but it's fear of contagious that is then translated to fear of the contagious. And contagious, if you're using if you're contagious, that means you are exposed. You have been exposed, and you are in the period of time where you can transmit it to someone else. But the way they're using it is anyone who could have possibly been exposed to anybody, and anyone who may come in contact with anyone who may cross a state line. That's everyone in the town where I live. And that means, and in these little towns in the United States, in the Midwest in particular, and I know in the South too, I've lived in the South a long time, but in these little towns, a lot of times we're surrounded by farms, big agricultural farms and things, and there's only, you know, a few roads in and out. It would be so easy to quarantine an entire town. Easy, easy, easy. They come in and they block off the roads and nobody goes anywhere. And when you start talking about people who, you know, in this town, there's not a whole lot of people who work in this town. They have to leave this town in order to work. And so they get quarantined. They get held. It's a 72-hour hold without a federal order. And then they get a federal order and they can hold you indefinitely without any charges. My friend Sean, we were talking about this, Sean Siegel, and we were talking about this, and he said, well, and there would be no criminal charges And I'm like, that's not an assurance, because if there's criminal charges against you, then okay, criminal charges are filed. So let's have a trial, and let's have discovery, and let's have all of those things. A jury of my peers. They're not going to file any criminal charges against me. That's not an assurance. Has anybody heard of Gitmo? They can hold us indefinitely.
I agree.
Force. That's force.
So one thing that comes to my attention is the fact that I can't tell you how many times I've written to my my federal legislators, my senators and congressmen about this, and I get this canned letter from them all the time saying vaccines have saved millions of lives, they're essential. They don't read the letter that I sent that talks about all the injuries that occur from vaccinations, that measles is not a big deal, especially in the US. And, the question is how do we reach these people? Because I know that other people in Pennsylvania have done the same thing. I used to live in Pennsylvania. We would write these letters and we would get these canned responses. So I think it's more than writing letters. I think we have to go meet with these people personally rather than just sending them a letter. They need to, see these vaccine injured children face to face. I don't believe I've done the letter writing thing. I'm disillusioned by it. So if you guys have any other ideas, please let me know.
No, I think you're right. I think we do have to be. It has to be face to face. Yeah.
Well, this is Melissa. You're right. We do. They don't read our letters. We do get canned responses. Vaccines save millions. Blah blah blah. At the same time, these people are receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from the vaccine manufacturers as campaign contributions. And then also, there is no way that we are not being stonewalled by Congress as it pertains to the whistleblower. Because they called a hearing on EpiPen within, 2 weeks? There's no excuse for them to be ignoring us, and that is exactly what they are doing. We have parents that have been writing continually for 2 solid years. So I don't know what the answer is. I do encourage people to meet with their lawmakers, but I can tell you that my congressman, Andre Carson, my U.S. congressman, he will not meet with me. He's blocked me on Twitter, as a matter of fact. So no, I do encourage people to meet with their representatives. If they will meet with you, you need to do that. Absolutely. But if they don't answer us, I don't know what the answer is. Like I said in a post, I think it was Saturday morning, all I can think of is the preamble to the Declaration of Independence after a long train of abuses. There's going to come a point in time when we are just being pushed. They already have too much on us, and it is time to push back. We have 4,000 people standing in the Dakotas, against the Dakota Access Pipeline right now. And that's what needs to happen here.
I think that it's already happening, but since the CDC said to write in, we need to be vigilant about writing in. Give them what they've asked for, because when the bottom falls out and we go into a revolt, everything will be documented as it should be. Actually, what I think we need are lawyers who are willing to take a stand and start suing.
Yes, exactly, Sheila. And then to circle back around to what Marcella said about it being unconstitutional,
Right.
Mary Holland, the law professor at NYU, she testified in front of the United Nations on April 26th this year. It was just a couple days after we were all down in Atlanta for the CDC rally. And during her testimony, she said that in 2005, the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, it's called UNESCO, addressed this issue, adopting the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights on the consensus of 193 countries. The participating countries hoped this declaration, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights before it, would become a set of guiding principles on the issue of consent. The declaration states that any preventative medical intervention is only to be carried out with the prior, free, and informed consent of the person concerned based on adequate information. It further noted that the sole interest of science or society does not prevail. So, enough with the herd mentality, because I'm tired of that. The first do no harm principle embodied the precautionary principle in medicine, clearly placing the interests of individual patients above the interests of the collective or the herd.
Well, it's
And
been
that's
done
from the
over and
UN.
over. And you know, it was done, the Nuremberg Code in 1947. It was done again at Helsinki in 64. It's been done again in 2005.
Well, do we have rights or don't we?
According to our Congress and according to the CDC, we don't. If this is what it's going to take, how could
Well,
they mandate something like this?
that's where I think they're getting around this, because we do have rights. We have rights as far as, I mean, we have state laws about vaccine exemptions, and we have rights under our state constitutions and our state laws. However, when there is when the government declares an emergency or a pandemic, then we lose those rights. I want to just, Catherine Diaz has asked a question here about what the letters, please address, sorry, Catherine, I'm coming up here. Please address what the letter should contain. I have been monitoring the number of letters and content. Most will be thrown out. And I have not written mine yet, Catherine, and to anybody else, and that's part of the reason why, because I noticed that they say when you are writing your comments, you need to, it says that you have to reference what particular, and maybe tell us more about this, but you have to reference the particular section or number of the that you're speaking about in your comment, and that if not, then it won't be taken. So that's a really important point. The other point I want to say is somebody commented, I think it was John, commented that one of the things that we can do and that we need to do, Vax really is a very important tool for us. That we need to be using, and I think it's an excellent idea to make it a goal to double the numbers of people who see Vaxxed in the next 3 months. So just because we've all seen it multiple times and have done screenings in our area, I think that's a really important thing to note, is to not be finished. We need to keep educating and keep bringing more people in, because civil disobedience is something that this is going to come to, I think.
Yes.
I also want to say that we have a rally coming up at the CDC, the Rally for Truth and Transparency. That's coming up October 14th, I believe. And, I really believe there's power in numbers. And if we can get a huge showing at the CDC, that's going to have an impact too. I mean, if you live 3 or 4 hours away, get down there and, spend the day at the very minimum and march with us, because that can make a huge difference. So I'm begging and pleading with every person out there that can get down to Atlanta or up if you live in Florida to do it. I think it's that important.
Yeah, and that's October 14th, where we are protesting outside the CDC from 7 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then there is an educational summit on that Saturday, on the 15th. And the plan is the Vaxxed bus is going to be there, and the Vaxxed team are going to be there with us outside the CDC on that Friday. So everybody who can be there, we've had 2 rallies before. This one needs to be 10 times as big. We need people to be there. We need people to stand outside and address this and say, this is the United States of America. We are supposed to be free. You don't own us. My body is not made for profit for the pharmaceutical industry, and neither are my children's bodies.
Yeah, at the last one, it was raining, and we all came with our raincoats, and we stood out there in the rain with our signs and our bullhorns, and you know, people definitely took notice. But we need more people to show up for sure.
So maybe if Jeff could answer that question about what specifically we need to be doing with our comments so that they're not thrown out. Can you address that, Jeff?
Yeah, it's not so much thrown out as disregarded. They exist in the public record no matter what, but for what reason is the real question. They're not looking for comments, throw out these proposed rules. Okay. What they use the comments for is basically to tweak things. And if you read through the description prior to the rule itself, you'll notice that there are certain sections it's actually asking for public comment about, and certain where it doesn't ask for public comment. And that's very telling, because that tells you where they think they might be overstepping a little bit. The other thing I wanted to say is I've been re-following the comments, and I'm seeing things like, what is this, Nazi Germany, and no, just no. Those comments are just completely useless, as well-meaning as they seem to us. So pick your section and go into as much detail as possible. The other thing I wanted to say about the public comments was there's public and then there's public. Okay, I don't really think they care what my next door neighbor has to say. If you've got an organization you can speak with or for, use that, stick it in. If you've got initials after your name, JD, MD, I don't care if it's LPN, use it. If you have any relationship to the healthcare industry or to the pharmaceutical industry somehow, use that. Or if you in the past worked in those industries, use that to add some relevance so they actually read it. But the most important thing is picking your section to talk about and going to as much detail as possible about what in that section needs to be changed.
All right, Sheila, you have any words for us? Any inspiring words?
It looks like it's a done deal from everything that I'm hearing. I mean, it doesn't even matter that we even leave comments. Is this part of the Patriot Act just spelled out? What is this, Jeff?
I had a comment for Jeff as well. What is our recourse against a Congress that fails to act?
Right.
Elections in a couple months.
No, I'm beyond
I'm
that.
being sarcastic, but
Oh,
yeah.
well, that doesn't work. I mean, you know, do we have recourse?
Against the Congress itself conducting its legislative business? No.
Willfully refusing to act while people, I mean, crimes against humanity, people are being hurt and injured and dying.
No, the best you can do is challenge the actual laws themselves. You can't really challenge Congress's failure or resistance to doing something. It has to be a challenge to the law, to the regulation. And the problem with challenging the regulation is that the courts look at it and want to know, is the regulation within the scope of the authorization of the law? And the problem here is that with the Public Health Service Act, it kind of is. It shouldn't be, because in my estimation, it's at least not in compliance with the Pennsylvania Constitution. I think there's a good argument in Pennsylvania to be made that the state actually has a responsibility given to it in the Constitution to protect us from stuff like this, from federal overreaches.
So in essence,
Yeah. Well, and the federal, government has the same responsibility to us.
but in essence, Jeff, what you're saying is, since the states are sovereign, we need to band with the legislators of the state.
I'm just speaking for my interpretation of one provision of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and our Constitution's really, really different because our history is kind of different and earlier than a lot of the rest of the countries, a lot of the rest of the states in the country. But I've always found that when I need something done, if it's doable at the state level, you can have far more of an impact. You call a senator's office, you might be getting somebody, and then you'll get that nifty form letter. Like a state representative or state senator's office, they don't want you to know this necessarily. You can pretty much walk in there and you have maybe a 50-50 chance on some days of running into them.
So in essence, what you're saying is the state legislators can sue to have that 1986 act giving indemnity to the pharmaceutical corporations overturned because they're paying so much for these children with autism now?
I think they can sue for reimbursement if they're not getting it, and at some point you're talking massive bucks there, because I know what it costed to treat my granddaughter, and I know the state's paying a huge chunk of that.
But if we can convince our state legislators, our senators and Congress people to sue on behalf of our state, can we do it?
If the state, basically, if the state attorneys general are willing to do it, and the state can prove some sort of overreach, or like if there's a federal law addressing unfunded mandates and putting this into the cubbyhole of an unfunded mandate indirectly, I think you could potentially do that. But I was thinking more in terms of this. With regard to these rules and CDC action regarding quarantine, isolation, and detainment, the CDC does not have its own police force. It's got to work through either federal authorities, which presumably would be the military, or state National Guards that are mobilized. And who's in the final analysis and control of state National Guards acting within their states? The governors.
The governor, that's right.
Or, local or state police forces. I'm saying the states make it hard for your state to comply with these orders.
So then our work is with the state.
I just find so much more influence at the state level where states can actually take action, which isn't getting rid of this rule. But as far as implementing the rule, how are they going to do it?
Jeff, there's a question for you from John. He would like to know if we want to change this policy and would like the best expert to change this policy, who is that one person / lobbyist, and what would their title be?
There is no powerful lobbyist or lobby group that is on board on these issues. They are stacked against three of the biggest lobbies in Harrisburg, for instance. You got pharmaceutical, healthcare, and insurance, and you know where they all stand on this.
Always together, right?
I was reading something this afternoon. I've been for some time now reading Dr. Susan.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's one thing I did omit, and it's a tiny lobby organization relative to the ones I just mentioned. You may find some support among the chiropractor group.
Right. Well, I'm working on them since I am a chiropractor. To date, it's been a mixed bag. I know that chiropractors, generally don't vaccinate their own kids, but taking that stand in their office is difficult. So that is my main emphasis now, is to get through to the chiropractic groups, because they did band together to help the NVIC get started essentially back in the early 90s. But yeah, so that's a good point, Jeff. So Marcella, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm kind of shifting gears here a little bit. I'm sorry but I wanted to. There's a question that I have about this that goes. When I first read this, I started thinking about the H1N1 pandemic, And when they declared it a pandemic, and I'm guilty of not knowing enough about this issue, but I'm trying. I'm trying to incorporate that into my brain. So I went to the World Health Organization's phases of pandemic declaration, and I guess there are 6 phases. And the 5th phase, if I'm understanding it correctly, is when there is an epidemic of an infectious disease in 2 member countries, and then there's an extended epidemic in 2 member countries, and then there is an outbreak in a 3rd country. So if we're talking about measles, there have been 2 extended epidemics of measles in one in the Philippines and one in a country in Africa, and I can't recall. It might be Zimbabwe, but I'm not sure. But anyway, there have been 2 epidemics, extended epidemics of measles for a few years at least in 2 countries. So if I'm understanding this correctly, when we go into the pandemic phase, then that means there's an outbreak in a 3rd country. So if there are 2 already ongoing, and then we have an outbreak in the United States, does that give the go-ahead for them to declare pandemic status? And then, here's where I'm going with this. I have a friend whose son was killed by the H1N1 pandemic vaccine. He was 19. His name's Christopher Cantervisto. And from what I've learned from Sandy is that during the times of a pandemic, during the pandemic declaration, there's no recourse if the vaccine injures or kills you. You can't do anything about it. There's no VICP. You can't file, even as horrible as it is now, to try to collect anything, for a vaccine injury or a vaccine-related death. There's no recourse if there is a declaration of pandemic. And my question, so that's part of that question. Then that was kind of in my mind. Then I was reading today, and when I was talking with Sandy about that the other day, and she was saying that she didn't think that would apply to the MMR vaccine because it's already an established vaccine and it's already on the table. It's already on the injury table. However, my thing was, so if they developed a new vaccine, if measles is declared a pandemic and they declared the need for a new vaccine, like they're declaring the need for a Zika vaccine, a single measles vaccine to be used in a pandemic state, is that something? And I don't know. I mean, it's a rhetorical question. So I guess I was reading today. I've been reading Suzanne Humphrey's latest book, Rising from the Dead, and it's a fabulous book. But as I was, I'm almost to the end of it, and I found on chapter 55 at the top of it today, it says, and this is a quote from Gregory Poland, who is, if anybody doesn't know who he is, you need to know who he is. And he says, this is a quote, "Our current tool for prevention has limitations that increasingly look," and he's talking about measles, "look to be significant enough that sustained elimination, much less eradication, are unlikely. Perhaps it is time to consider in earnest the development of the next generation of measles vaccines."
Hmm.
Could this possibly be a way for them to, because Merck has always maintained that they are not, part of the reason why we still have the MMR vaccine was because it was more important to protect the program. So could this be a way to get the government to pay for the development of a new single measles vaccine and for the rest of us to be used in the clinical trials? And if anything that happens is not compensable under the VICP?
Well, Marcella, I have a question about the measles. They're all endemic, like we've talked about, to their own countries. So you get 3 separate countries, 3 different types.
Phenotypes. Mm-hmm.
Right. How is that a pandemic? They're
Well,
separate measles.
Well, there are at least 23 different phenotypes, genotypes. It's been a while since I've said this, but I think it's phenotypes. There are at least 23 different phenotypes of measles. And the type that is endemic to the United States is the A phenotype. Like, for example, the phenotype that was involved in the Disneyland measles outbreak was B3, and that's how they know that the likely person who started that, the ground zero patient, was a traveler from the Philippines, because that's where the B3 phenotype has been causing a lengthy outbreak. So they think that that's where it started. So that's a really good question, Melissa, because when I think about that is like, okay, so the different phenotypes of measles, wouldn't that explain why our vaccine doesn't work very well anyway, and it wears off very quickly. So, but that would be another issue with it if we have a different phenotype of measles. And the response of people within the medical community and the pharmaceutical community to that is that measles does not differ like that. Any measles vaccine will cover any other measles outbreak, which does not make any sense, because it's not like that with flu vaccines. It's not like that with mumps vaccines. Mumps also have different genotypes of mumps. And the mumps vaccines have to be specific for that particular genotype of virus. So, it doesn't make sense to me that they say that one vaccine covers all of the different types of measles.
Well, that's just a lie.
Yeah, well, look who we're dealing with.
Well, which comes down to an issue of trust.
Yes.
Who trusts the CDC?
Right.
Who trusts the vaccine manufacturers? What reason do we have to trust any of these people? We don't. This is dangerous business right now, is what I think.
I think so too. Yeah, and it's the problem that I see, and in answer to your question, Melissa, who trusts the CDC and who trusts the pharmaceutical industry? Unfortunately, there are still too many people who do. And this is nothing, and from the way I look at this is why, if 73% of people in a pediatrician's office are saying that they don't think vaccines are necessary. Now, what the pediatricians say is that, and the AMA, the American Medical Association, what they say is that that's because vaccines are a victim of their success. And we don't think they're necessary because they've been so good at wiping out disease. That's bullshit, but we have always had outbreaks of measles. We will always have outbreaks of measles, and the reason we're having so many outbreaks of whooping cough, which is also listed on this proposed rule, pertussis is, if you go to table number 4, measles is in cell 1-1, so it's a 2-column table, and measles is in the top left cell, so it's the first one in there, and it's not an alphabetical table. Measles is the top one, and then in the left column at the bottom is varicella. So they're talking about chickenpox outbreaks as well, chickenpox and whooping cough, pertussis, along with hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola. So I don't know what the answer is to this proposed rule as far as how do we stop it. I think from my perspective, what we have to do is get really, really vocal and really work to educate more people and bring more people into this awareness, because too many people, once we hit critical mass and once we get enough people to stand up and say, oh, hell no, not in their comments, but you're not going to do this. We're not going to allow this. I mean, what are we going to, how can we stop it? We have to just keep educating and keep bringing people in.
And the danger is, from what I can see, it's not enough for us to stand up, rise up against being injected when they can spray us. You have over 2 million bees now dead
Right.
in Florida, a bee farm. All the bees are dead from spraying for the elusive Zika virus. They're poisoning the environment. So it's so large and it's so huge. It's just massive, the destruction that's going on to the human race in this country alone.
Well, we do have a wonderful Hoosier mama that fights with us at the State House here in Indiana, and she texted me today. And what she is going to do in her little small town is she's going to get together a marketing group plan. She thinks that the way that Vaxxed was promoted was a good plan to inform the public, and she is going to make a sign and pamphlets and stand on the street and let people know about the CDC's overreach. She's going to set up a booth with education materials and a petition at the farmer's market where she lives. And, so, I mean, that's what it's going to take. Miss Marcella stood out on street corners by herself. That's what it's going to take.
Right.
Sheila Lewis Ealey says, stand up, rise up, and that's what it's going to have to take. You have to get out from behind your keyboards, write your letters, make your meetings with your representatives, go to those meetings, but get out from behind your keyboards and get out on the street.
That's what it's going to take.
Have a dinner party, invite your neighbors over, find some common ground, find things that you agree on, and don't be that crazy anti-vaxxer that everybody thinks we are. This is one issue that affects us all. It's just that other people don't see it that way yet. So have your neighbors over for a barbecue. Get to know the people you live around. Get out from behind your keyboards and get actively involved in your community.
And we've got to convince the attorney generals of our state to sue. That needs to happen if that's the way we end this. States are sovereign.
Well, but I think that it says in this proposal that federal law will, usurp state. I don't have it printed out. It was an 88-page document. If anybody has it printed out, it does say that this will. I don't know what the word was.
What it says, what it said was something along the lines of, this does not supersede state law unless state law conflicts with our law.
Oh.
So, it doesn't, but it does.
Right.
Yeah, I really like the idea of having vaxxed parties in your house. Screen the film in your house, bring your neighbors in, talk to your pastors, get them to sit down and start saying it, because the truth is our pastors and ministers and rabbis really can influence a lot of people. And I think if we can reach people who can reach a lot of people, I really think that's a great way to go. I also think getting to that CDC rally, joining state groups that are working on bills and stuff like that. I also, Marcella's got a great website, vaxtruth.org. I definitely recommend you go there. I have a website called Healthy Alternatives to Vaccinations. Get the movie out. I'm also working on some presentations that I'll be posting on my Facebook group. So there are a lot of different ways, and what may be comfortable for you may not be comfortable for somebody else who's watching. So we have to step out of our comfort zone too. We can't just, as Melissa said, sit behind our keyboard.
Right. Right. We have to. I mean, listen, our kids and our grandkids are depending on us. We cannot let this fall in their laps, especially when half of them are going to be autistic by 2032, right?
Right. 16 years from now.
Right. We cannot allow this. We cannot allow our children to have to deal with this. We've got to take this on right now, and we've got to do our level best to stop this as much as we can. Like I said, they've already gained enough ground. They've already got enough on us. It is time for us to push back.
We must push back.
So we've been on for a little over an hour. I know that there are probably some people that need to get off. And I do have some people, yes, this is being recorded and you can share it later. So I want to know if our panel is, can we do this again in another week or two? Invite more people, see what other ideas we have, see what kind of game plan we have. I think it would be great to keep these conversations going. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is Melissa. I'm not as busy as Sheila and Marcella is, so I'm game. I think what I'll do, I'm going to take Jeff's advice and I'm going to drill down on that agreement section, because that's what I spoke about. I would never agree to that. And they're going to hear exactly why. And, we just, I'm gonna take his advice. I'm gonna work on that, and I can report back and let you guys know if I've gotten anywhere or what I've done. And I suggest I don't know. We need to share documents. Maybe if that Who's Your Mama I was talking about, if she can get that marketing material together, maybe we can share that document in a way that we can all easily print it and hand it out in our communities. Just whatever we have to do, by any means necessary, we have got to do our level best. So I'll check in.
You're right. We have to make people aware of what's going on. They're not going to hear this on the evening news.
Right.
It won't be on the noon news. And it's strictly a grassroots effort.
And that's a good hook. What you will not hear on the news.
Right.
People know that. I've been to town hall events. We've heard our legislators gripe about it. Everybody knows that we're not getting the news.
Right. I think it's a really good idea to dig into the document and really pick apart. That would be a great thing for people to do, is to dig into it and pick a section to really drill down into it, like you said, Melissa, and like Jeff advised, and to focus on those sections where they're asking for comments. Because as Jeff said, for if anybody who missed it, I thought that was a really important tip, is that if they're asking for comments, that's where they realize that they're overstepping, or where they're thinking they're overstepping. So that's where they may be on more shaky ground. I mean, not
we're overstepping with the entire process. There's nothing that they are doing that's right and in order in this country. And why would our Congress allow the CDC to have that much authority, especially with what's going on with vaccinations?
Yeah.
After a long train of abuses.
Right.
All right. Unless anyone else has any final thoughts, we can end the broadcast. Anybody else have any last thoughts?
I'm seeing my friend Io putting some web addresses up there, and I've seen a few of them, Dr. Io, but one I want to mention is for people who want to find out more about the upcoming CDC rally. And by the way, the upcoming CDC rally, the protest at the CDC is October 14th, and that is the last day for comments on this rule. And you can find out more information at www.cdctruth.info, and you can find out what's going on there. And please join us, because we need a lot of people in Atlanta protesting about this.
How ironic that the last day for comment is the day of the CDC rally.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
Well, I think it's great, and I can't wait to make my sign to address this proposal.
I agree.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Marcella, Jeff, Melissa, Sheila. I thought it was really great, and we got a lot of great comments and got people going. So I'll also be posting updates on Healthy Alternatives to Vaccinations Facebook page, and we'll have to do this again. So thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Melissa.